to start off with, we start sort of with a territorial acknowledgement. Being in Victoria, we like to acknowledge that we are, with respect, living upon the Sanghees, Esquimalt, and Wasanic peoples' territory, and that their vital relationships with the land continue to this day. And so we always like to sort of start off with that. Mm-hmm. And so, as I said, my name is Madeline. So I'm the Director of Communications for Electr. I didn't really mention that before, but so that's sort of how I ended up being in this role of communicating and connecting sort of the community. And so that's sort of our goal with the whole speaker series, is to take all of these amazing stories of people like you and bring them to our community and any other UVic members who might be interested in doing something similar, or just want an interesting story to listen to if it's outside of their usual range. And so if you wouldn't mind sort of doing a quick introduction of yourself, that would be great.
I'm Mary Collins, and we're probably going to get into this a little later on, but my career has covered the public sector, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, but perhaps interesting for this particular discussion and interview is that I was a member of Parliament for 9 years, from 1984 to 93, and a member of the federal cabinet from 1989 to 1993, and held 5 different portfolios, including as the first woman to hold a defense portfolio, and also minister responsible for the status of women at the same time, which was fun. And then I worked in a number of different sectors, but ended up spending 5 years in Russia later on after politics, which was an interesting time, and then have worked internationally supporting women in political life in a number of countries in Vietnam, Ukraine, Mongolia, and that's also been very interesting too. I now live in Saanich, and I call myself a full-time volunteer. I'm retired from paid work, and but keep pretty busy with lots of things on the go.
Yeah, you sent your bio, and I was very overwhelmed with the amount of things that were in it and that you're still doing. I was very impressed. You're on more boards than I even knew one could be on at one time. So
it's sort of been the story of my life, but yeah.
How did you sort of get started? It's such an impressive array of different things that you've done in your life that I would love to know sort of how you got on that path.
Well, when I think about it, it actually, goes back to high school, where I was very involved in all kinds of things in high school. As editor of the yearbook, I was director of the operetta, performed in different things. I did some professional acting during those years. Good practice for politics, I can tell you. And various kinds of organizations. And then I went to University of British Columbia for my first 2 years. And there I got involved in politics. And the student was in those days, the Student Progressive Conservative Party, and got quite involved, got a real interest in what they were doing. And as a result of that, switched my major to political science and went to Queen's University, which I thought was potentially going to be a really, outstanding opportunity, which it was, and went on from there.
And did you go straight from Queen's into like a career role, or do you have your master's as well?
I'd always, was interested in, someday maybe getting into an elected office, but I thought that's not going to happen. Women just weren't doing that. We're looking now in the early 60s. I graduated from university in 1961. And so I thought that's kind of, let's think of something else. So I was really interested in public administration, and I joined the Ontario government and spent over 12 years working my way up through various roles pretty quickly, actually. And then was actually the first woman to hold a role in what was then the cabinet office. So John Robarts was the premier of Ontario at the time. And so it was the functioning of cabinet and cabinet committees, and they hadn't had any women there before. And also while I was there, I was pregnant with my second child. That caused a great deal of consternation. Because not only were these, great gentlemen who were elected politicians, but weren't quite sure about having a woman sitting in cabinet. But then when a pregnant woman, ooh, that got a little touchy. Anyhow, we all survived. And I went on from that, and I was assistant to the Minister of Health at that time, and then went into the private sector, actually. And we moved to Sudbury. My husband was involved in local government there, and I started up my consulting practice and started to work in the Arctic, in the Northwest Territories, up in the Beaufort Sea, on social and environmental issues. And
Wow.
so, yeah, a few years on that. And moved to Calgary. And in Calgary, I got involved with women's groups of various kinds. Those were the days when the women's movement was really quite vibrant. And of course, we were repatriating the Constitution and the Charter of Rights in Section 15. And we had groups working on trying to make sure that equality provisions were included in the Charter. And we also were celebrating, at that point, it was 50 years since the famous five, which I'm sure you're aware of, had been so successful in getting women being able to be appointed to the Senate. And we had a big group that was involved in, so we were involved in all kinds of interesting things. And I stayed involved in partisan politics those years as well, helping on elections and different things. But I never actually thought I'd get a chance to run. And it wasn't till a few years later, I'd actually returned to Vancouver, which is where I'd grown up. The work I was doing at that time was based on Vancouver Island and Vancouver, and got involved with a group of women from the party. And they had set up a women's group to support women in politics. And actually, it was when Joe Clark was the prime minister. That's 1979, and he was really keen on getting more women involved in politics. So he set up these women's caucuses across the country, and I became involved with the Vancouver one, and we had seminars, and we worked on, the whole idea was try to get 50% women. Still not there, but we had to get started. And then in 1984, we knew there was going to be an election. And with some of my friends, I decided to contest a nomination on the North Shore, which is where my parents had lived. And that was actually one of the toughest parts of the whole process, because it was a winnable riding. And so there was a lot of interest. So I had to work very hard. I had a great team who was out there selling memberships, and then ultimately coming to the final night, where in those days everybody got together, 1,000 people in a high school auditorium, and gave speeches and voted. Very exciting. And I won the nomination. But the little story that goes along with that is that the next day, and we're now in West Vancouver, down near Ambleside, if you know that area, it's right on the beach. And John Turner was then the leader of the Liberal Party and had just become prime minister. And he was looking for a riding to run in Vancouver, because that's what he wanted to do in the election that would be coming up. And he thought the riding Capilano House Sound, where I was now the nominee, would be a good one, because Iona Campanola was in North Van, and she could kind of look after both ridings, and help with that. So the media had asked me, and I did an interview, I remember, down at the beach, because we didn't have an office or anything at that point. The nomination was over. They said, "What are you going to do when the prime minister runs against you?" I said, "Well, that'll be the first mistake he makes." And he didn't. And we went on. And that was actually, when I think back on it, a great election. It was pretty obvious that our party was going to win. You never thought that as a candidate, though. You just, you had to work as hard. And as a brand new candidate, it was challenging fundraising and building a team and getting out. And those days you could do lots of things in person, coffee parties and parades and all the great things that were involved. And then September the 4th, 1984, the election, and I won my riding, and the party won a huge majority. Well, I remember I had 3 children. I was a single mom by then, and I decided to take them to Ottawa. So a couple of weeks after the election, we had to go to Ottawa to be sworn in. And I had a dear friend in Ottawa who had been involved in the women's movement of politics and things, and she kind of guided me through and helped me find a place to live temporarily and schools for the kids, and it was pretty challenging, I must say. But I do remember walking into the Parliament, into the House of Commons, and it was empty because I was going to be sworn in, but just being so in awe, thinking, I'm going to be here. Like, I'm here. I don't believe this.
I can't imagine.
I know, it was quite something. So for 9 years, that was my life, and commuting back to Vancouver every other weekend at least, sometimes every weekend. It was challenging, both as a backbencher and then as a cabinet minister for the last 5 years, where I did a lot of travel, of course, as well in the roles I had held. But sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
But as I mentioned, I was the first cabinet posting, and this now was in the end of 1988 was the election that we won. That was the big free trade election. And in 89, a new cabinet was sworn in January, and the Prime Minister Mulroney asked if I would take on the role as Associate Minister of National Defence, which I thought, oh, I don't know anything about this. Anyhow, I'll do it. And I remember that afternoon, there was a luncheon for the new cabinet ministers, and then I went to military headquarters, and all the generals, and they were all there sitting around the room, and the minister, the late Bill McKnight, and myself introduced, and I kept thinking, like, I don't even know what their ranks are. I don't know what to call them. And of course, they didn't know what to call me either. They stumbled, yes, minister. Anyhow, it all worked out. But one of the very first challenges I had in that role was that there had been an appeal to the Human Rights Commission that women were not allowed to be in all trades and roles within the military, because they figured the combat roles that would be not good for them, not good for the unity of the rest of the people. So, and because they couldn't be in those roles, it was very limiting in terms of their promotion, because you usually had to have some experience in those kinds of roles before you go higher and become general. And also, the department wanted to appeal the ruling. And I said, no, we're not appealing that ruling. We're just going to get on with it and manage it as well we can, and encourage women to join and move up through the ranks. And I had great support from the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Mulroney was a huge supporter of women in all kinds of ranks. And I know some of my colleagues didn't necessarily agree with it, but we overcame. And I get great delight sometimes now when I meet women in the military, in captains of ships and different roles, that fighter pilots. That was another part of the story. As a backbencher, I had served on a all-party legislative committee to look at what actions and changes the government needed to make in order to comply with the new charter rights. And this young girl, we were in Winnipeg, young woman about 12, came to appear before the committee. And she said, I've always wanted to join the military and I want to be a fighter pilot, but I'm not allowed to. They don't allow women to be fighter pilots because that's considered a potential combat role. I thought, that's not fair. I said, maybe someday I'll be able to do something about that. So I always felt great. And I don't know if she ever joined or not, but there certainly have been lots of women who have. And that was. So from there, the next year, then I also became minister responsible for the status of women. And that was interesting. I had the department with the largest budget and the department with the smallest budget. But we all had to work together. And there were lots of interesting issues that came up. And status of women in those days, too, it was a lot of work on women in science, trying to encourage more women to go into science. And we set up various mechanisms to certainly try to encourage that. And women in politics, and making sure that women were being recognized in roles within government and the public service. And again, the Prime Minister was very supportive of that, and whether it was in foreign affairs and diplomats or senior positions of supporting women to move ahead. And then also a lot of work on violence against women. Um, that had been the horrific issue in 1989, wasn't it? L'école politique.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, when I became minister, we started looking at what could we be doing. And I set up a panel. It was a panel on violence against women. And I was just looking, I still have all the reports in my bookshelf. It was early days, but you look at the recommendations, many of them still make sense. A lot of them, of course, have been implemented and things have changed, although it's still a big issue during the pandemic, even, a bigger issue too, challenging issue. Um, so lots of interesting things I was able to do in politics.
Yeah, this is a very
Mm.
impressive and extensive list. And then after that would be when you ended up working in Russia?
Yeah, well, I came back to Vancouver and I was president of the BC Health Association, which represented in those days the hospitals, when hospitals had their own boards before regional health authorities. And was there, we provided a whole bunch of services to them. And then I started working again, doing a lot of consulting work for provincial government primarily and some other kinds of activities as well. And that led to some opportunities overseas, and one was in Russia. The original project was one on women and labor market reform. It was encouraging women to get into, better roles within the labor market and employment. And we worked on that. Another one was in Ukraine. That was on focusing on encouraging women to get involved in the politics of things. And then one in Vietnam, where that was kind of weird how that one happened. I was walking down the street in Ottawa, actually, and someone I knew came up to me and said, "Would you be interested in going to Vietnam and helping us with this project we have going?" I said, "Why not? Sure, it sounds interesting." So it ended up, I think it was 3 times we went, and there was a woman who was the secretary of their equivalent of their legislative committee, and she wanted to train the women members of their legislature, the counterpart legislature, to be more effective. They come from little villages and most of them had no experience at all. They were kind of appointed, I would say,
Mm.
probably in most cases. So I was working with the other colleagues in that team and we had the chance to travel and to some of those parts of Vietnam and work with the women over a period of about a year and a half. That was a really interesting project. I really enjoyed it. And then ultimately, it led to the project in Russia, which was on health. That had become kind of my major area of focus, post-politics, health policy. And I'd done a number of projects for government on that. And this was an opportunity to work with the Republic of Chuvashia, which is a small republic about 14 hours by train from Moscow on the Volga River. They were reforming their healthcare system, and it was a Canadian contract through what was then CETA. And I was the sort of on-site manager of it, which was really interesting, very different part of the world. And then I was asked by the World Health Organization if I would come to Moscow and work on a national health policy project, which I did. So I had 4 years in Moscow. And I think back on those days. It was tough because I didn't speak the language when I went at all. I didn't know anybody. There was about 3 people in Cheboksary, which was the capital of Chuvashia, where I was posted that spoke English. There was internet in like one internet cafe. Go to, pay to use the internet. It taught you how to survival in those kinds of, loneliness. Good practice for the pandemic. And yeah, when I came back from that, I joined the BC Alliance for Healthy Living as the executive director and spent 10 years there and did a number of different roles and again, some other kinds of consulting and then retired. I'd moved to Saanich, which is part of Victoria, of course, and my daughter was here and one of my sons. And then my daughter had her little grandson, who is the joy of my life. And so now I got involved with a number of different boards, but I'd always been involved with women in politics in Vancouver. There was a group, the Congress of Women Voters, who had started women's campaign schools over a period of years, and I was the honorary co-chair of that, along with Penny Pretty for a number of years, and would speak at it. And it was basically to help women develop the skills and knowledge to be able to run for municipal, provincial, federal, any kind of elected politics. I don't think it exists anymore. You guys are kind of taking over some of those roles. I have seen that happen a lot. There have been organizations involved in supporting women that kind of, are around for a period of time, and then they kind of go into abeyance and others come along. But as long as we keep moving, getting women involved.
Yes. Yeah, hopefully we can at some point do some sort of more of like campaign schooling.
Yeah.
That I definitely think that's very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely a lot to learn from people who have been through it.
Right,
which
yeah.
all of those sort of positions, how did you build the confidence, like going to Russia when you didn't speak the language, or running to be a member of parliament? It's all very...
Yeah, I guess I had a good sense of self-confidence. The other thing I've always done, which I would recommend, is that I've always thought of, what if this doesn't work out? What's the downside? And will I be able to cope with that? Do I have the strength, the skills to cope with if something doesn't work out? And that kind of helps you. It provides a foundation that gives you some strength and confidence to have thought about those things and be prepared to face the worst if it should come. So
yeah, that's... And then what would you sort of say would be your biggest learning curve across that whole... Sorry if there's probably more than one.
More than one. More than one. I mean, going back to my education, just learning about public administration and the political systems and how they work. And then certainly once I was an elected politician, understanding how to get things done. Not always easy. You have to work with people and help to persuade them. And there would be times when, you would have members of your caucus very upset about decisions you would make. I'll relay one that was in probably about 92. And I still was at Defense. And we had made the decision that we would no longer have restrictions of based on gender preference. So that up till that time, it was kind of no comment, but you couldn't be outed in a sense. You couldn't say that you were gay and probably get in. And we felt that was wrong. And Kim Campbell was at that time the Minister of Justice. And so we had to present this decision to our big caucus. Caucus met every Wednesday morning. And we knew there would be lots of opposition. And the minister at the time, he's long passed, so I won't even mention his name. He decided that, he wasn't going to go. I will just leave it up to you girls to explain this and get everyone on side. I really chickened out. And I remember there was another one. I was Minister of Health and Welfare in the Kim Campbell government for the relatively short time. But one of the things we were going to do is start putting labels on cigarette packages. I mean, it seems so common now, but that was a first, and to discourage too much stronger programs against anti-smoking. And I remember some of my colleagues from Southern Ontario, which is a tobacco growing area, coming up to me and saying, "You're going to do this. You're not going to do this. There's no way we're going to let you do this." I said, "Well, just watch us. We're going to do it." We did. Grown since then, of course, enormously. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I feel like that is you got to be in a very interesting time where there's lots of movement. I know there still is, but
yeah. So you have to have done your homework. That's the other thing. I think I was pretty assiduous at just making sure I'd done my homework. I knew my briefs. I worked hard, developed good relationships. I mean, it wasn't that you necessarily liked everybody, but you tried to make sure that you respected other people's opinions and they felt they were listened to, and reached out. I mean, a status of women minister in those days, Judy Rebeck, I don't know if you know of Judy, but Judy was an amazing, she was in charge of the organization that was sort of the women's advocacy organization at the time. And she was an amazing woman and very strong. And a lot of my caucus said, why would you even meet with her? You know, she'll have nothing but criticism for anything we ever do. She'll never like it. You got to meet with her, got to listen to her. And actually, she and I got along quite well. And I mean, you had some different views on some issues, but on some issues, we certainly agreed. And she was very supportive on the work in terms of violence against women, I recall.
Yeah, I presume you ended up or had the opportunity to meet a lot of very interesting people across the board.
Yes, did certainly over those years. Margaret Thatcher, some interesting women, yeah. And some of the women that I really look up to and respect from years past. I mean, Ellen Fairclough, I don't know if you recognize that name. She was the first woman to be a cabinet minister in Canada many years ago. And of course, Monique Bégin, who was still around, and Judy LaMarche, Liberal cabinet ministers in those days. And of course, now it's so exciting to see in the States Kamala Harris as VP. I think that is, I'm just reading her book actually, and it's a really interesting book. And I'm just so excited about seeing her step into that role.
Yeah, I was going to, so it is a good book. I had seen it in chapters the other day and I hadn't picked it up yet, but good to know. And so what would you say, so obviously being the first woman in a lot of these roles, we were bringing a whole new everything to the role, but how do you think being a woman sort of changed what you brought to...
Sorry.
No worries.
I didn't turn it off. Oh, I think that did something to my Zoom.
At the moment, I can still see you.
I lost you.
Oh.
Can you see me?
I can, and I can hear you.
And I can't see you. I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Let me try stopping my video and starting it. Maybe it's on my end. Did that help?
No.
I'm probably the least tech-savvy millennial that exists, so I won't be able to help.
Should I go back and sign in again?
Maybe.
Let me try that.
I can try.
Find from my browser.
Maybe the best would be to like leave the meeting and then come back. I don't want to end it on my end because then it'll stop the recording, but there's now two of you.
There's you. I've got you now. Okay, we're back.
Yeah, I have two of you. I have one that doesn't have a video and one that does, but that's fine. Oh. Two is better than none.
You have two voices?
Nope, it's just another Mary Collins little box.
Oh. Okay.
I'm not sure.
It's a different system now. I'm on full screen. Before we were sharing a screen.
That might have been my fault. Is that back? I don't know. I should be a Zoom pro by now. It's been 9 months, but
I know.
Well, if I look okay on your end, you look great on my end. So
okay.
It should be. Oh, yeah. now I have two videos of you. So I might remove one of the.
Remove a video. That's a good idea. Sorry, can you manage to cut out all that?
I think so. Okay, can you still see me? Is everything good to go? Oh, nope, now I can't hear you anymore. Hmm. Uh, hmm. Okay. That might have worked. Can you still hear me and see me?
Now, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you too.
Okay, great. Crisis averted.
Yeah, right. Oh.
And I will just pass it along to someone a little bit more tech savvy than me, and they can cut out the middle part.
Okay. Oh, good.
But anyways, so I'll rephrase my question because I asked it terribly the first time. So how do you think sort of your lived experiences being a woman, being a mom, how do you think that sort of affected what you brought to those cabinet roles that were so traditionally run by men?
Well, just our different lived experience as women, and that certainly not having had some of the opportunities that men had, particularly in those days. I think it is better now, but it was still, you were very much a minority, and some people in power didn't necessarily have the same level of respect for women as they did for their male colleagues. I think that's changed a lot now too, but yeah, it was interesting. It was we had a little group of women from all parties from the House of Commons that we used to get together to talk about some issues. I mean, nothing that was terribly partisan political, but just some broader issues and how women were treated. I remember we would talk about that, and that was kind of fun. We used to get along, actually, women from across party lines. I don't know if that's still the case or not.
Yeah, a little bit of a community within sort of the separate units, which I hope it still exists. That would be great. And then, so now you said you're on, sorry, I'm going to close my blinds because I'm in this little sunburst here. Okay, sorry about that. I hate blocking out all of the very nice and much appreciated sun, but
yeah.
But I am going a little bit blind, so that's a bit better. And one of the questions that we've sort of been asking everyone more out of interest is sort of how do you think the pandemic has affected women specifically, and how do you think it will sort of affect them going forward?
Yeah, well, I think it certainly has, and I've been on a couple of Zoominars that have discussed those issues, and that women have been perhaps impacted more because either they've lost their jobs, or they're having to work from home and having to look after their children and perhaps teach their children from home, depending what jurisdiction you're in. And there's been a rise in terms of domestic violence too. I mean, kind of understandable. People are together all the time, and the tensions just build. And I've heard of a few stories where couples that were planning to separate, in fact, and of course, because of the pandemic, they haven't been able to, and that creates even more of a negative dynamic. And it's just, people aren't able to advance in the same way. You may be working, but the opportunities to kind of move ahead are probably not going to be there. It's pretty kind of static. And concern about the future. When is all this going to be over? And if you have friends or relatives that might be affected or have been affected, so it's been tough. I think it's been tough for women. Women usually, have the load of double the load, domestic and work. I mean, a lot of men are come up to the plate a lot more than they used to, but it still often just falls to women to have to do a lot of that work, and even more so during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think it's interesting to see, and like sort of a positive of how people are recognizing it's more of a conversation now of how much women do take on those sort of dual roles, especially now when women are so prominent in the workforce, but are still sort of the main caretaker of the family. I think it's definitely very interesting. But we will see how it goes going forward, because obviously it's hard to predict. It's all new.
I know it is hard to predict, and let's hope the vaccines will work and they'll be able to be deployed and be able to get back to actually seeing people face to face. And I mean, I think there'll be some things that come out of the pandemic, the use of technology, which will in fact continue and find new ways. We've talked about it, some of the organizations that I'm involved in, that we now do Zoom. We'll go back to doing face to face, but will be an access for people, say, outside of Victoria to join in to some of these events. Our Canadian International Council, I was moderating an event the other day on Canada, Russia, and the Arctic, and we had our Canadian ambassador to Russia, a woman, who was on it from Moscow, and there were a number of the people, audience from Russia, and then asking questions, and that was very exciting, to have that, and basically, very little cost involved. So there will be some things I think we'll be able to do a little bit differently as we move ahead, and the next generation will think it's always been done that way.
Yeah, no, I definitely think there's a few things that have been put online, and I'm just like, I would have never thought that it could go online, but now that it is, I was like, it just makes sense.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. So now, as I mentioned, I call myself a full-time community volunteer and involved in a number of community boards, the Saanich Police Board and the Opera and Goward House and CIC. And I really enjoy that. It's sort of all volunteer and really of giving back to the community, and great people involved in all these organizations. It's really wonderful to see people so involved in their community. The strength to think of our communities, and particularly here on the island. Wonderful.
Yeah. I'm originally from Calgary. I'm only out on the island for school, so this is my fourth year out here, and it is a very amazing sort of community. And I do love to see. I live down the street from one of the Salvation Armies, and I love seeing just sort of the community involvement around that organization, around all the organizations that sort of spread across Victoria. It does seem like a really great community here on the island.
Yeah, and there are a lot. I'm involved in an organization that just we gave out small grants this year for the first time, and so we had a call for grants. They were just under $5,000 each, but we had 31 organizations apply. We could only give enough money for 5, but I was so impressed by reading. I was on the committee doing it. All the good work that they were doing, supporting youth, a lot to do with food, and particularly during the pandemic, not necessarily food banks, but organizations that are trying to provide services and then also try to provide food, and a real plethora of good work that's being done. Yeah,
even through doing like university club work, talking to some of the other members of the club. For example, Alina is in so many different things that I think it's so impressive of all the different organizations that are out there and the people who are trying to change the world. I think it's very impressive.
Make it better.
Yeah, and all of these chats have been super inspirational, because all of you amazing women have definitely opened the doors for all of us young people coming in now. So
And it is good to see at the federal level, Chrystia Freeland is the Minister of Finance now, our first woman finance minister, and it's 50-50 cabinet. And here in BC, the new cabinet, again, now we have a woman finance minister, and something we probably would never have dreamed of, certainly 20 years ago, if not 10. So there have been some real marked advances. And it's interesting, one of the things I've read is those countries that have a female prime minister or leader have done better during the pandemic than others. So, I mean, New Zealand with the Prime Minister Ardern is an example that is often used, but it's good to see that too.
Yeah, I know I'm a bit biased, but I think women are great in all of these positions.
No,
Yes.
To see it getting a little more.
Yes. But so I'd like to thank you for talking with me today and covering all of that. It was very, very interesting to talk to you, and I think your whole career is unbelievably fascinating. I would love to do even half of the things that you do.
Oh, I'm sure you will, Madeline. You've got all these wonderful years ahead of you to do things and make a difference. And I think that's one of the big things is to always think about how can I make a difference? And there's lots of ways you can do it too.
Yeah.
So thank you. It's been a real pleasure, and good luck with the work with Elect Her.
Yeah, thank you.
More about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. And I'm glad Alina put us in contact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, when I upload this, I will send you the links, then you can watch it or not watch it. I mean.
Well, thank you, and good luck with all the other interviews you're doing and the work you're doing.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Take care.
You as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.